as I'm going deeper into my study of what the future holds for us, I'm delighted to have with me Professor Joseph Fuller, a professor of management practice and general management from the Harvard Business School, who co-leads the initiative, the Managing the Future of Work initiative at Harvard Business School. He is a 1981 graduate from Harvard itself and was the founder and first employee of the very famous global consulting group Monitor Group, now known as Monitor Deloitte after its acquisition. During his 3 decades in consulting, Professor Fuller worked with senior executives and policymakers on a wide variety of issues related to corporate strategy and national competitiveness. He is currently researching the evolution of the role of the CEO and the C-suite in public companies, and will be talking to us about the future of leadership and management practices in this conversation. Professor Fuller, absolute delight to have you, and thank you so much for making the time to do this.
I'm delighted to join you.
Terrific. All right, so Professor Fuller, as we start this conversation, sort of set the context for this, as someone who is working at the sort of cusp of the future of work, why did you think it was important for Harvard to have this initiative? Why is it important for us to have an eye on the future of work?
Well, I think that we can all acknowledge now in 2024 that it's very apparent that the rate of technological change, when combined with the demographics of the workforce in much of the world, is going to require companies and governments to revisit the rules of the road of employment. How do we get more people into the workforce? How do we prepare young people to enter the workforce? How do we reskill incumbent workers now in roles that would be dramatically affected by things like artificial intelligence? I feel a bit prescient because we started our research almost 15 years ago in anticipation that these factors would come to the fore. They've come about faster than maybe I would have anticipated, and were catalyzed by the global pandemic in that regard. But the rules of engagement in terms of how we develop talent, what we expect of our education system, how much reskilling and upskilling is going to be required of incumbent workers are in the future be completely different. It's very important for decision makers to understand that, understand how they have to think about their economics of employment differently, and for skills providers like educators to realize old approaches are not going to be fit for purpose.
Okay, terrific. So you mentioned sort of three stakeholders: young people who need to be skilled in the right way, educators who hold this responsibility, and then, of course, companies who need to shape the way they work. Great, terrific. I think all three stakeholders need to take note of the future. As you've been studying this, let's talk about sort of emerging themes. If you were to pick top 3 or 4 large themes that you would say, look, if you're going to talk about the future of work, these are sort of 4 major trends that I'm seeing coming around.
Well, the first is that the way work is structured and the way benefits are provided, the way companies evaluate candidates has created a large subpopulation of people that are really forced to the margins of the workforce. We call those hidden workers, not because they're hiding from work, because they're lazy or don't want to make an effort, but because they're screened out of consideration by employers because the employers have overly high requirements for educational background or years of experience. The employers use technology like simple earlier stage AI to arbitrarily sort through candidates and exclude those, many of them based on 1 or 2 blemishes on their record as opposed to an absolute inability to do the job. So how do we change work practices to encourage more people to participate in the workforce for longer in their lives is the first. The second is
you're saying companies just have a very high threshold in terms of who they're looking for to hire, and getting a larger population to be included in that populace is something that we need to worry about.
Yes, and it isn't that the threshold is unreasonable. It's some way to think about it, Vibha, is that employers want to minimize the number of candidates they consider. They want to make their hiring process hyper efficient.
Yeah.
So therefore they provide a very fine mesh filter,
Mm,
and that screens out lots of candidates who are just marginally less than they're seeking.
mm.
But they never consider that resume.
Well,
The
this is kind of
technology
like
screens it out.
this is like admissions to Ivy League colleges as well, right? It's sort of like there's lots of students on that margin that you're talking
Yes,
about. Similar screening process. Okay,
yes.
I get that. So that's trend number one. Terrific.
Trend number two is high value added work is increasingly going to be occupied by women. Why do I say that? High value added work usually requires two attributes simultaneously. Higher levels of educational attainment, and women are an absolute majority of university and graduate students in the United States, in France, in India, you name it. Women are increasing their lead in terms of higher degree attainment. The second attribute is strong, what we call social skills. The capacity to interact with others, go into strange situations, to be comfortable, better levels of empathy and communication skills. And women can outscore men on those attributes very consistently worldwide. So the future is more female in the workforce, but work practices in almost all companies, including those in more advanced economies like the United States, are still very much rooted in a paradigm of one earner, presumably a male from a traditional household, things like work hours, travel expectations, frequency of relocation for work in large companies are still rooted in that paradigm.
Mhm.
So companies need to get ready for a more women-centric workforce at
Mm,
at high-paid levels, and their progress on that is inadequate.
mm. And caregiving as well. Trying to figure
Care,
out.
caregiving is the big driver of that, and of course, these two trends interact because
Mm,
the failure to acknowledge the omnipresence of caregiving and the
mm,
role of caregiving in excluding people from work altogether, discouraging them from seeking a more demanding job or seeking promotion. The way
mm,
it drives voluntary turnover
mm.
when an adult says, "I can't reconcile the needs of work with my obligations to my parents, to my children, to my spouse." And
Yeah.
very often that is not made explicit in the dialogue with the employer. It's just a person shows up
Mm.
and resigns their post,
Yeah.
and the employer's ignorant of why. By the
Mm,
way, in the United States, the percentage of men in high-paid positions who have indicated they've left at least one position because of such a dilemma is actually slightly higher than the
mm,
percentage of women. So it's not just in terms of choosing your career to accommodate caregiving. That's not just a female phenomenon.
mm. Do you see, Professor Fuller, the participation rate of women exceeding that of men or simply increasing from where it is today?
I would say it'll be increasing somewhat, depends on the economy you're talking about from today, but what will happen is not just an increase, it's that things like average earnings and seniority will go up faster than they do for men.
Okay.
If you look at, for example, the US economy, on average, women make less per hour.
Sure.
And but when you adjust it for the occupations they're in,
Mm,
there isn't a very big wage gap. So you hear numbers, oh, women make 70% the amount of men as men do.
mm.
That's right. It's just
There are those
effective
kind of
math
jobs.
because it doesn't adjust for occupation. It's
Oh, in
about
that case. Okay.
5 to 8% gap if you adjust for occupation. Still material, but not nearly 30 points. That gap will close because the mix of jobs women are in will
Mm.
get richer very gradually, but over time.
Okay. Okay. But you don't see the participation rate of women exceeding that of men, like
It,
we have seen in business school and the
it,
classrooms, right? We've seen that sort of mixed
I,
change.
it's very culturally dependent. So historically, for example, in a country like Germany, it was rather countercultural for a woman to work outside the home until 20 years ago, and remains that in certain regions in Germany. So it's a bit difficult to make a worldwide generalization, but the ability of women to occupy more high paid jobs and therefore close that perceived earnings gap is directly correlated to those phenomena I mentioned earlier of their achieving higher level degree attainment and having superior social skills on average.
Excellent. Okay, I noted that. Okay, great. That's trend number 2. Perfect.
So trend number 3 would be the urgent need to upskill and reskill incumbent workers. Companies are, in many economies, are fixated on playing what I call the spot market for labor. They go out, they want to hire at the last possible moment because they're trying to preserve budget dollars. They then say, oh, we need cyber technicians. Oh, we need AI prompt engineers. We have to go and hire someone because we don't have anyone who can do that. Playing the spot market for labor will increasingly be a fool's game. Because of the poor demographics in a lot of the developed world and the inability of countries to adopt their immigration policies because of political pressures, the fighting for the scarce talent that's available in the merchant market, in the spot market, will become a very expensive game. Moreover, I think a very important phenomena is that the useful life of technologies, the rate at which they get replaced by either superior versions of what I already have or new superior products offered by a different vendor, continues to fall at a dramatic rate. And in some instances, the half-life of technology is now shorter than the time it takes to master the technology. That means going out and trying to hire somebody who's a skilled worker to fill a current need gets to be more and more difficult, and their useful life shorter and shorter. So it'll be increasingly wise and important for companies to say, I need to take the people who understand my corporate culture, understand how we do things around here, what's called tacit knowledge, who already have relationships, who I can evaluate through a personnel dossier. I can see their 10 years of service. Are they a reliable worker? Have they been promoted? Are they punctual? Do they take many 6 days? Are they late? Versus and invest in building that person for the skills you're going to need now or soon, as opposed to say that person's not fit for purpose. I'll just go and try to hire somebody in the teeth of all the other competition for that same talent. Now,
so
the talent
upskilling within their existing workforces.
Yes.
Okay.
That you grow your own, as opposed to you go and hire somebody else's.
But isn't this contrary to the whole gig economy phenomena we're seeing?
Well, no. The gig economy is a different phenomena. The gig economy is, for many workers, a way to supplement their income by doing something that they are good at and enjoy. In other instances, it's a lifestyle choice, and there are a number of platforms that enable people to earn good wages in the gig economy. And another way to augment your workforce is to rely on the gig economy. But companies find it very hard to maximize the value of gig workers because their management processes are all designed around, and managers' experiences have all been gained by supervising other employees. So if you say we see very consistently in big companies that their satisfaction at the level of the manager whose work is actually being supplemented by gig workers, their level of satisfaction with relying on gig workers is much lower than the CEOs say it should be, or the CEOs imagine it will be. Because the CEOs see cost flexibility, but that project manager sees somebody I don't know how to motivate, that I don't have some coercive power over, who
Mm.
isn't sitting down the hall so I can look over their shoulder and seeing if they're being
Ah,
productive, who
okay.
doesn't know how we do things around here, or that you go to Manjari to get that data, or you go to Abdullah to get some other information, and they find it very hard to integrate them productively in their processes. They
Mm.
find outsourcing the task in their entirety to
Mm.
gig workers much easier than integrating one or two gig workers into a
Into
blended team.
I see. Okay. So, in that light, do you see the percentage of gig workers, let's say in the US, since that's a geography you're so familiar with, do you see that expanding over time in the next couple of years?
I do, and I do in a couple of ways. As you'll well know, there are many successful gig platforms in the United States that focus on services:
So,
deliver food, take
mm,
me to the airport, come by and care for my mother who is ill because I have to be out at a business meeting tonight.
mm,
Um, Come by and do a service for me, build a new cupboard for me, uh, fix a plumbing fixture that's broken. So
mm,
that will all continue to grow. And as I said, much of that work is being done by people who are employed and are seeking supplementary income.
mhm,
The second will be a increasing amount of uh, gig services that are almost a form of outsourcing, as opposed to simply providing augmentative help
mm,
to an existing project. There are growing potential barriers to gig work, certainly in Europe, but also in the United States, where governments are not sure they understand this, think that the companies are trying to avoid social payments or other things that their tax system and their government revenue systems are pivoted on. They're correct about that. They're not trying to do it illegally, but if it's more efficient and cost effective to hire a gig worker than hire yet another full-time employee, companies will do that, just like they'll turn to a different supplier of ball bearings if there's a better, cheaper supplier available can meet the quality standard. So gig is going to continue to evolve. It's going to grow faster at higher skill levels, but we're not going to simultaneously have a hybrid workforce that's highly gig as well. As
okay.
companies get more used to managing hybrid, and those managers I've talked about earlier get better at
Mm,
managing in hybrid environments, that's pretty parallel to managing a gig worker. So maybe some of those productivity losses that people complain about will be diminished over time. But
okay.
it's going to take time.
It's going to take time. Okay,
Yes.
great. Okay. Let's talk about, is there another trend? We've done three so far.
I think another trend is that large companies and bureaucracies, government bureaucracies, will be undergoing in the next 10 years the single most profound and far reaching uh, uh, era of process transformation we've ever seen. That in all of our models here at Harvard, we see that something between 40 and 50% of the hours associated with various tasks in a typical job can be either sped up, or we say augmented,
Mhm.
or replaced by generative AI. So this is the most important development since alternating current.
Mm,
It will fundamentally transform the way organizations structure decision-making processes and execute them. And you may have heard, your listeners may have heard of a kind of silly metaphors like we're trying to change the engines on the plane while it's flying.
sure. Yes.
That is what is going to happen.
Mm,
The difficulty, the real challenges here, and why it's going to be such a profound and challenging transformation, is that historically technology has been used to either automate part of a process or improve the efficiency of a process. But the technology has both been designed and delivered to fit into the existing process.
And not
That's
replace.
and not lead to a complete reconfiguration of the process.
Okay.
Generative AI is so fundamental and so sweeping. The
Mm,
correct way to deploy it is not to improve my current process.
mm,
It is to design my process to maximize the productivity of the AI. So I
mm,
have to change all the surround,
mm.
who works in the process, what their decision rates are, what their incentives and metrics are, how do I measure them, how do I manage them, and
It's a
so
systemic rehaul as opposed to earlier where it was just augmenting
yes,
or improving.
exactly right,
Okay.
exactly right.
Okay. I
So
see.
so that you're talking about a re-engineering of
Mm,
it could be the inland revenue service, it
mm,
could be a division of a large diverse group, it could be a university, but the way the entire process needs to be revisited.
mm,
That is very difficult because since it's so fundamental, let's make it easy and just think about corporations. It's difficult to you can't stop your current process and flash cut over to the new process. You have to ease from one to the other, which
sure.
means you're simultaneously paying some of the cost of both.
Mm,
So it's going to put in the short term a squeeze
sure.
on people's margins, but
Mm,
when they shoot out the other end,
sure.
they're going to have a fundamentally better process with
Mm,
much better economics and lots of productivity upside.
But that transition phase where you still have to keep both going is your pain period.
Yeah, and it will be painful. You will hear some howls.
Okay, sure. But net, professor, there's so much conversation about AI is coming and taking away our jobs, and then there's this other side which says no, it's just going to change the kind of jobs we do. Jobs aren't going anywhere. It's going to just augment, modify, etc. Where do you stand
Yeah.
on this spectrum? Are the jobs going? Are they getting replaced? Are there completely new categories coming? What's going to happen?
We've seen in multiple technological revolutions that it's been very difficult to predict what new types of roles will emerge and how quickly they will grow, but it has always happened. For example, today in the United States, the number one um, uh, open job description for engineers is for prompt engineer. There was no such job posting 3 years ago in the United States.
Yeah.
It's the same phenomena we saw with mobile app developers.
Hmm.
One year there were no job postings in the United States for mobile app developers. The next year there were 80,000.
Sure.
So these you do see these kind of rapidly ascending jobs. It will displace a very large number of tasks in jobs, which means many companies or institutions will need fewer people to get the same level of productivity. So there will be significant disruption of
Hmm.
existing employment. And countries that have very inflexible labor laws are going to find it very hard to take advantage of this technology and risk their competitive global companies being put at a disadvantage versus companies located in jurisdictions that have more flexible labor laws.
Okay, so with that argument, what happens to the larger workforce if companies are
Yeah,
going to get disrupted and changed and not need that many people?
yeah.
What then happens to the to people?
What we're going to see is we will definitely see some significant dislocation of workers. There's no doubt about it. We'll
Mm,
see a continued growth in job descriptions that rely heavily on human skills
mm,
or and non-routine work. What do
mm,
I mean by that? A routine job is one in which what's required in a task is very predictable and limited in scope.
sure.
Non-routine work, particularly non-cognitive non-routine work. So I'm not talking about um, that a white collar analyst might have to look at looking at the economics of a market one day and then looking at the economics of an internal facility at another. AI is very good at that. But if you're talking about service jobs, for example, or jobs that require significant ability to interact productively with the most volatile, emotional, difficult assets to manage, which are called human assets, those jobs will continue to grow. Generative AI also is overweighted in its impact on high paid workers.
Sure.
So the notion of massive loss of work is a bit overstated. But it's going to hit populations that have generally been insulated from the negative impacts of things like globalization as we've seen it historically. So this is a very complex econometric problem. I think over a 25-year period, it's going to disproportionately relieve people of the dullest parts of their job, the parts of their jobs they don't like. It will help improve the productivity of people in other types of work by allocating their time more effectively. It will allow more human investment in things like services. It will very much improve things like education and democratize access to outstanding education at a level we can't even imagine today. So a lot of puts and takes over a 25-year period, I think, to an outcome we'll look at as very favorable for a lot of humanity, but quite a lot of disruption in the middle, and
But
there
net
will be
net,
pain.
will you see unemployment rate net go up or go down?
That's a multi-factor question because you simultaneously have to factor in what happens to workforce participation, because unemployment is a measure of people who are seeking work and whether or not they're able to get it. I think we will see uneven change in demographics by age in terms of people stopping participation in the workforce.
Earlier?
It will depend. It's both, I think, actually later, because AI will allow companies to configure roles that can be done more remotely or seasonally, and that older workers with really rich experience will have tacit knowledge, we call it, knowledge of the operations that you really can't teach the AI except through inferentially through its processing of data. So I think there will be probably a net decline in workers in the developed world who are under historically structured work, so that, and we see this pre-AI in Europe. I mean, in Spain or in Italy, if you're a young person, you are generally working on year-to-year contracts. You do not have a traditional permanent employment because it's so expensive and so inflexible for the employers to hire anybody on that basis. The only people who get those jobs are either extraordinarily in demand or have really great social assets. So that somebody's doing them a favor, someone's doing their parents or themselves a favor. But we'll see a proliferation of new types of working relationships that go beyond gig, but will include an expansion of gig that allow more people to participate on their terms, including that caregiver. But wants to continue to be part of the formal economy as opposed to the informal economy in order to make their lifestyle more pleasant.
Okay. So it sounds like the sort of the tenets of employment itself will change, and how you describe or think about employment will also shift in the future.
And that will be very challenging for governments because they lack imagination, and they have layered regulation after rule after law around the assumption that the model of employment is an adult goes and works full time for a single worker. Undoing that whole thicket will be very challenging.
Okay. All right. I know you have to go. So last two questions. On leadership, I know you teach the entrepreneurship course at HBS. How are you training young entrepreneurs? And senior managers to think about leadership in this new age of hybrid, of co-botting, of more machines probably in the workspace over man? What are sort of, if I had to give sort of three leadership lessons, what would be your sort of top three?
Well, the first is that um, the success in leadership is almost always an expression of the capacity to make decisions and manage with empathy. Empathy, not in the sense of, well, I feel badly that your team lost the cricket match, or you you know you broke your toe walking around a dark hotel room and that must hurt. That's just human kindness, but the ability to understand what your colleagues or your prospective colleagues, how they feel about something, how they interpret something, and have that factor into your, not just your decision making, but how you seek data to make a decision and how you convey a decision.
Hmm.
The second is that talent, these kind of all rounders I'm
You're saying
talking about.
put an EQ lens onto decision making.
Yes, but EQ is increasingly the kind of hackneyed term that people throw around, and who do you know who says, "Oh, I have a terrible EQ"? You know, so it may be a tax inspector, but that's about it. So what I'm talking about is really honing that skill to uh, relate to the other person, not by putting your hand on their shoulder or saying nice things to them,
Hmm.
but having what a psychologist calls a theory of the mind.
Hmm.
That I can imagine what it is to be in this situation, in that person's shoes, and
Okay.
that's influencing the way I explain
Hmm.
what I want to do, influencing the questions I ask them before I make that decision. Uh, what we see in our data is that coworkers don't expect their bosses just to do whatever the coworker wants. They just want to make sure that their position is considered,
Hmm.
and a decision that is not consistent with their decision is explained to them such they can understand why the choice was made.
Hmm.
So this becomes particularly important, a second lesson, because all around talent both have technological skills and social skills,
Hmm.
will be in such high demand
Hmm.
that workers will have a choice as to where they work.
Hmm.
And if I don't feel that I'm listened to here, I don't feel that my boss has any appreciation for what my life is like, doesn't take that into consideration. It's only about meeting the objectives that maximize their evaluation with their boss. I'm just going to leave,
Sure.
and I'll leave with impunity and leave with complete confidence that I can get a good job somewhere else.
Sure.
So you have to be an employer of choice.
Okay.
You have to have people want to stay with you. And
Sure.
that's almost always a function of two things: that the worker is comfortable with what the company does for business, that it feels the company has values and a moral purpose, but
Hmm.
also that my people tend to quit bad supervisors,
Hmm.
not companies. And so
Hmm.
companies that have higher uniformity of supervision and higher quality of supervision will have higher levels of retention and more competitive success.
Okay. Okay. Terrific. And anything else on the lessons for leaders? You said put yourself in the shoes of your coworker. Primary
Yes,
lesson. Any
yes,
anything else?
yes. I mean, we have to understand that in periods of change, there's a lot of anxiety, but you have to find ways, as I mentioned earlier, as a leader, to motivate people to broaden their skill base, to embrace the training activities, and that's part of empathy.
Hmm.
But it really goes beyond what companies have done historically. Companies have mostly relied on the job training. Uh, a lot of training programs, certainly in the developed world, the absolute their spending as a percentage of revenue of most companies down by over half over 25 years. A lot of the formal training that's provided is on things like uh, ethics, anti-corruption, uh, bias training. It's not about skills development for productivity. And a good boss will understand that one of the things that motivates their best workers is the ability to keep learning and expanding their skill sets in ways that help them advance in their career,
Mm.
even if that advancement is outside your company.
Sure.
And cultivating that, being explicit about it, and
Mm.
making clear pathways for people so they know there's a future for them in the company is
Okay.
going to be essential for effective management going forward.
Okay. Wow. This sounds like a lot of work needs to be done
It
from
is.
leadership and
There is.
management perspective.
There is, and that's why leaders make more than lorry drivers.
Okay, now shifting to this now to the educational lens. Firstly, what's your view on education and the institution as the sort of a location for where one goes, a temple of learning? For me, Harvard Business School is my temple of learning. I learned mostly everything I know at that one institution. What's going to happen in the future?
Yeah.
Are these institutions and these temples going to exist, or are we just going to learn virtually? AI is going to come and change everything. What's going to
Yeah.
happen? And more than colleges, are schools also going to be around or get disrupted?
Well, like all industries, bad performers are going to get obliterated. And a lot of the education sector is very ineffective. AI is a fabulous leveler of learning opportunities. We
Hmm.
see this in multiple early research that it it lowers the gap between high performers and mediocre or low performers considerably. So I think on a global basis and in companies and in educational institutions, AI will be a way that we can provide much higher quality instruction at fraction of the unit cost. AI will be very effective at helping teachers be more effective teachers because it will be looking at, let's say, a math class performance on a problem set, and it'll say to the teacher, 80% of your students made mistakes that suggest that they do not understand this
Hmm.
concept or that concept. It will finally save us from the incredible inflationary spiral in university cost
Hmm.
because it allowed the delivery, sharing of curriculum across disciplines. One thing that just to illustrate that already exists, the second largest enrollment in any course at Yale University, which is one of the premier universities in the United States and historically viewed as a friendly rival of my university, Harvard, the second largest enrollment is in a Harvard class taught remotely in
Oh, wow.
computer science.
Oh, okay.
And that's an acknowledgement by Yale that they're not going to build a computer science faculty from the ground up. Acknowledgement by Harvard that if your mission is to educate future leaders, that has no four-walled boundary.
Hmm.
So I think this will be no sector will be disrupted more than education. It'll be very much to the benefit of the learner and very much at the expense of the education bureaucracy and non-innovative instructors. But please remember that a huge amount of effective learning is in the human context. You can't hone your skills to manage or lead empathetically by interacting with AI.
Hmm.
You do it by interacting with others.
Hmm.
Motivation is often driven by being in a competitive situation.
Hmm.
We know now, because of developments in neuroscience, that people well into their 20s are still developing neurologically, and
Hmm.
that therefore, and a lot of that is driven by social interaction. So I think we'll start moving, and perhaps the biggest thing, and I've done what sin in newspapering. I've buried the lead, we call it, is that learning will become much more customized by the way I'm going to learn as AI as I present data to you in different ways. Oh, when I add a video clip, this learner seems to actually gain knowledge much faster than they were when I didn't. Or, oh, I've given you now 5 problems and I now understand that this is what you do not understand about how to do long division correctly.
Sure.
Or, I now understand that,
It's
you have bad grammar.
Sure. It's aiding the tutor, it's aiding the classroom.
Yes.
Okay.
Makes it much more efficient.
Is
much less homogenous.
Much less homogeneous. Okay, very personalized. But is the institution itself going to remain, or do you think institutions will become redundant?
Yes. Some will become redundant and some will remain. Many will remain.
Many will remain.
But low value added teaching, commodity services, making up the parts of the system that make up for poor performance of other parts of the system will all begin to be reduced because the system will go up in performance, and it'll become increasingly apparent what programs are successful, which ones aren't. Successful ones will be available through new modalities.
Okay, so it sounds like a healthy reshuffling.
Be a very dynamic market, and market forces will win out.
Last question: if you had to go to college today, put yourself in the hat of a high schooler, what would you study?
Logic.
You would go get a degree in logic
and rhetoric. Because I don't have to study computer science anymore. I have to be numerate, so a minor in data science would be a good idea. But I'm not going to have to do calculus ever again. I'm not going to have to do simultaneous equations ever again. I'm not going to. I can get lots of assistance in improving my writing skills automatically. So education as a way to contribute to knowing how to think, how to question data, how to question assumptions, how to make an argument, how to motivate people. Those gain in value, and technical skills, they don't disappear, but they begin losing value relative to those skills I just enumerated.
Okay, so you would say the humanities are going to now begin to take center stage once again. We saw the STEM revolution, and now you're saying the humanities will potentially come back to the forefront.
Yes.
Okay, looks like the Ivy Leagues always knew what the future of work is going to look like.
No, I'm not so sure about that. It's better to be lucky than smart.
Okay, I know you have to go. I would have loved speaking with you for another 5 hours, but this has been terrific. Absolutely amazing insights. And thank you so much once again for doing this.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.